G'day everyone, and welcome to this, our first ever episode of Road to Restoration. Now, what is Road to Restoration all about? Well, quite simply, this is the channel where we look at your problems on your own projects that you might be building at home or at work and you're having trouble with, and we'll walk you through step by step as best we can. Now, at the moment, we're in August of 2021, and as you know, COVID-19 is everywhere and countries around the world are having successes and failures, and Australia is still struggling. We've got lockdowns in the eastern states, and although we've been relatively safe in Western Australia, it has locked us in a lot. Originally, I wanted Road to Restoration to be the channel where I came to you and worked with you on your project, one-on-one in your shed, and we put that up as something to show what is happening and what can be done for other people with similar problems. So COVID killed that completely, straight off. So what we're doing now is we're looking at some of the mentoring I've been doing over the past few years with people around the world, and we will look at their problems together and we'll give them a few solutions, and hopefully we can build on it from that. I still like the idea of coming to you guys, but we need this channel to stand on its own 2 feet and fund itself in a way that we can make it a reality. So we need you to subscribe to the channel straight off, like it, and share it with all your friends who are building projects as well, and I'm sure we can make something work. So let's get into it. Today we're going to be looking at 3 problems from 3 different people. First off, we're going to be looking at a problem that Mark in the Netherlands is having with his Opel Record B. And typical for a car of the era, it's got rust outs in the fronts of the front fenders. But I'll just read out a bit of his email and we'll all get an idea of where he's at. So he's, hello Deb and Rob, COVID-19, coronavirus, yes, we've got it here in Australia as well. I've been thinking about the rust repair, and I have been folding cardboard to visualise the piece of metal that I will have to cut and bend in place to match the rusty part. Now if the metal would have been all square and flat, it would not be a problem. But he's pointed out in the pictures that he's got some curved edges. Can I bend the metal first and give it a rounder form by hammering the top with a dolly, or is there a different way of doing this? And he's made me a few pictures. Another question would be if I need to have a shrinking tool or an English wheel to make these kinds of pieces. I have hammers and dollies, and maybe that's enough for this job. Okay, your advice would be a great help for me, and yep, and greetings from the Netherlands from Mark. Okay, let's have a look at a few of his pictures and see where he's coming from. Okay, so we've got his car here, and he's talking about these areas in the front, and that's a pretty typical rust out for this sort of car. So, what have we got from there? Close up on that. Yeah. While we've got this picture up, this is a good place to start. A lot of these cars will have previous restoration work done to them at various times in their life, and particularly if you live in an area where it snows and salt is used on the road to actually melt the snow off, slime, mud, grime packs up in these front corners and they rust away. So by grinding the paint away, we can actually see if there's any old repairs there, any fillers, and we can see the extent of the rust. Further to this, we need to be looking on the back side of the panel underneath the car to make sure that there's no further problems underneath there, because although we've got a rust out along these edges and in the front here, we could still have rust which is rotted the metal on the back and just put some pits and scaly rust in there, and when we start to weld, say, across on an angle like this, it'll burn holes in it. So a thorough investigation is the first step always, and make sure you get the backside cleaned off. And also, particularly with cars in snow countries, a lot of them will have had some underbody sealant sprayed in there, and if that lifts, moisture will sit behind that, and you certainly can't weld this side with a thick underbody sealer on the bottom of it. So you need to get the back all cleaned off and go from there. We'll just move on to, right, these photos are highlighting the fact that there's a curve in the panel this way. I'm suspecting there's a little one running up the panel as well, that one being the right side. And what have we got? And here's the cardboard template Mark has made. So first up, we're going to make ourselves the same little cardboard template that Mark's made at home, and we'll have a look at where the problems are and what we can do to correct them, and we'll just move on from there. This is an excellent starting point. Mark's got himself a cardboard template. But if you're going to make cardboard patterns up, make them too big to start with. So if we're looking at, this is the corner of the panel and this is the area he's ground off, if we make them a little bit wider, a little bit longer up here, we can always trim that back afterwards. So we'll just put a fold in, and we can do... Now looking at this car from a manufacturer's point of view, that front nose section on the panel isn't going to be one piece of metal. There's going to have to be something else in there that forms the area underneath where it runs back towards the headlight. And I'm thinking that Mark might have done the right thing and made his template to suit the outside skin. So once we fold it like that and like that, we've got a rough impression of what the car's like. So whether this corner has been cut out or it's got a diagonal cut on there, I don't know, I haven't seen the car. But what we need to achieve is a curve in here, which we can't do now that we've got these two folds together. It's just going to damage the metal and destroy it. We're also probably going to need a little bit of fullness in this area up here, a bit of crown, so we've got to introduce that to it. And I'm thinking we need a little bit of a curve in this edge here. So as you can see, once we start bending it, even if we do this in steel, we're going to get this wavy edge there, but we can correct that out of there. On this front edge, there is nothing you can do. We will only wind up destroying what we make if we fold it this way to start with. If we have a shrinking tool, we can put the first fold in it there, we can shrink this edge across here, and we can actually get a curve in here that will work. But we will then have to get this second fold in here with the bottom edge already been shrunk. That will be difficult. So my suggestion is we make it in two pieces of steel. So if we cut this through here, we'll wind up with a relatively easy section to put a curve in, with or without a shrinker. And we'll wind up with the second piece here, which is the same thing. It's going to be relatively easy to get a curve in. So we'll make that now in steel and talk about what I'm looking at exactly. I've just cut a couple of pieces of metal. We'll do a couple of different things here. I'm looking at the pictures Mark has sent us, and I'm thinking there's going to be a little bit of fullness in this panel, so a little bit of crown. So anything that's got like a bulge in both directions, that's called crown. So that would be a high crown area. And if we're making a rust repair patch, we need to be able to match the shape of the crown up. Normally, I would like to put the crown into the panel before I start doing any of the other folds around it. And even if we wind up putting it in a folder and flattening one edge out when we put the fold in there, it'll come back if there's already that tension built into the sheet. So we'll just have a look at a couple of things quickly. So if we look at the old 34 Ford, this will explain more what I'm talking about. So we have got a very high crown area in here. It curves this way, it curves that way. So if we're looking at any sort of panel that has a little bit of crown in it, the best way to test if you're heading in the right direction is to see if it wants to rock on your panel. So if we sit that there, that's going to rock this way, it's going to rock that way. If we start introducing the shape into the panel, we're going to keep referring back to our original piece on our car. And I'll point this out now. This is why it's very important not to go cutting rusty sections out of the car before you have got a replacement section to go in there, because we will always refer back to that original piece to make sure we're making our piece in the right shape. So if we were making a piece for this 34 Ford, we would have a long way to go. Looking at Mark's record, we don't have much to go in there, and that's why I'm going to make two patches, because I'm going to make one with a bit of crown built into it and the other one without, and then we'll look about how we can add it into the other one afterwards. Now, if you're making a small section, it doesn't matter if you get a little too much crown in it, because we're going to have a weld all the way along this edge here. We're going to have a fold here and a fold there. The bit of shrinkage on this weld will drag some of it back out, and if you find that it has got a little bit of a bump after you've finished, that can easily be brought down with a plenishing hammer. So we'll just sort of introduce a piece in here, and then we'll put some bends in it, and we'll move on from there. So what were we making? We were making a left fender, so this would be the inside here. Easiest way to do this sort of work is with a mallet and a shot bag. These wooden mallets, or you can get a nylon version, they both work equally as well. They're available online easily if you can't find one locally. If you don't have a shot bag, don't panic. If you've got a shopping bag or several layers of shopping bags and you have put some damp sand in there, that will work as well, as long as it's screened sand and there's no sticks and lumps and bumps in there. Dry sand tends to want to flatten out. If you've got damp sand that's almost like a pastry dough or pizza dough, where you can sort of squeeze your hands through and let go and it'll hold the shape, that's about perfect. So if we look at this, I can push in there, it will hold its shape. So that's what we're looking for. So what we want, a bit of low crown. Now we're going to have a fold across here and a fold down here. So if we want the centre section to raise, we've got to stay away from our edges. So we're working the middle of the sheet, and already we're getting some curve in it both ways. Don't have to hit it hard because we don't want dents in our panel. But what have we got here? We've got a bit of rocker this way and a bit of rock that way. So that's bringing us up the way we want it to go. So this one here, we know doesn't have a lot in it, could do with a little bit more. We've got a rock in there. So we're creating some fullness in this area here, but we haven't got much in here. And I think we'll just introduce a little bit more in there. Now if you're trying to create a high crown area, that's actually looking pretty good now. So we've got a bit of fullness this way, and we've got fullness this way. So that's a bit close enough. If you wanted to quickly bring up a high crown area and you're making a patch anything up to this size and you have got a shrinker, you work all the edges with the shrinker and that'll pull the edges in as well as bring the outside, the inside up. Now you will have to either have a wheeling machine or a shot bag or something like that to introduce the shape into it. Mark asked the question whether he needs a wheeling machine for doing this sort of work. Not really. You will find that making tiny patches with a wheel is difficult because you're forever wanting to run over your fingers and things like that. You're always getting too close to the edge because with a wheeling machine you're relying on squashing this piece of metal out in the centre a bit, making that metal spread around it to raise it up. So if you wheel all the way to the edge, you just make a bigger piece of metal that's a little thinner. If you run over your fingers, it barks. So how do I know? I do know. So what we'll do now is we'll just cut this line in the corner here and we'll put a bit of fold in this one, and at the same time we can put our folds into this piece and then we'll come back. Now the beauty of this size patch is we can fold them in the vise very easily, so that's where we'll be. So I'm just coming in with a 10mm fold because 10mm will bend very easily. Looking at Mark's pictures, I'm working on 20mm for the edge that runs down into the engine bay. So now once again, I should have marked the other side, but this will work. We'll just put a cut in here, and even though it's not to scale, it will give us all an idea of how it's going to end up. Just cut this fold in here. Now I'm guessing the way Mark has made his pattern that he's matched it up to the way the car was made originally. So if not, you just have to make some minor adjustments. Now here's the piece with a bit of fullness we've fed into it. The amount of crown that we've added to this metal's not great, so we can get away with clamping it this way, it will spring back, and we can clamp it that way, it will spring back, and naturally once we put this fold on there it's going to straighten it right out. So what we'll do is we will fold both of our panels and then we will work on putting some shape into them. Now, if this angle on the completed car or on the assembled car isn't at right angles, you'll have to adjust that accordingly. If it's not quite there, you can work it on an angle like this and bring it back against the flat surface on the back of the vise or on top of the jaw across there. And if it's over bent, we can achieve that gently hammering it this way. It'll tuck it around. We can hammer it more this way and bring it that way, but always make sure we come back to this edge along here. Now automatically that's taken all the crown out of our piece of metal there, but we've still got this bulge back here that we can work with. So, once again, smaller pieces are usually fairly agreeable. I'm thinking I've already mucked it up because I should have put this one in underneath first, but that's not going to matter for what we want to do. So we've got that one all straight and it is flattened out, but by putting that crown in there before, we've built some tension into the sheet which will come back. So I've just got to tidy this edge up a bit. It is winter here and there's a bit of rain and wind noise out and about, and my dog doesn't like the rain or the wind, so he's running around a bit upset on the floor, so you might be able to hear him in the background. Nearly. Now if we're going accurate to the car and it happens to have this tab folded in the back and we've done that underneath this fold, if we sit another piece of metal in here and then hammer it over, we're not going to have a step in the fold. We're not going to get pressing sort of edges on here, but we get them good enough for what we want to do with them. So here's our flat one, we'll put him aside, but you can see from that, this one is absolutely perfectly flat on the top, and this one has still got a little bit of a curve in it. So what we're going to do now, the easiest way on this one, now we've got to remember this is the left-hand fender, we're coming down, the headlight is below us here, we want the curve to go this way. So all I'm going to do is set it across the open vice jaws and we're going to do this. And straight away we've got our curve back in there. We can work this one the same way and we will get a curve, but we're also getting this wave along here. So this is the extra metal that we're now going to shrink down, and that's easy to do with our plenishing hammer. I'm working this on my little steel bench, but the back edge of the vise will work, the top of the jaws will work. But what we want to do is get rid of these waves, and we're going to just gently plenish them out. Just pick an angle where you can all see what I'm doing. And already they're starting to disappear. We're going to have a couple of goes of working this edge along here and then hammering it back this way here and recreating the waves, but they will disappear and we will get our curve in there. What we want to avoid is a heavy compression like this. If we're hitting it hard, we're just stretching this area in here back out and we're taking away our curve from the other side. We just want to gently tap it and work the waves out. So we'll go back, we'll give that another bit of a curl and we'll come back to it. So we've still got a curve this way, and on this car we know there's not very much, and we've got this fairly close. Now, what's going to happen on this particular car, I'm assuming, is there's going to be some welds along here. So if that's the case, you can cheat a bit and you can drill your holes in here for your plug welds, and that will allow that to move further than what it's doing at the moment. This other edge here, where we've created this curve in here, will tap out quite easily. Now we've also got a little bit of damage in here. Now, the size of the metal, most of that will lift out by hand, and we can also work the metal with our hands like this, and we will come back to our curve in there. So this has got very little curve in there at the moment, but we've got a nice curve starting in there. That's a 20mm overlap. You can get away with it up to 25mm, but it's going to take patience, guys. It's not something that's going to happen straight away with just a few taps of the hammer. So from here, we've got the top section of our repair patch almost ready to go on the car. So a little bit of tapping around, a little bit of work in this area where I was just pushing it out by hand, and we've got this one ready to go. All we've got to do is make the lower section and weld them together, and we've got one patch made. So we'll have a look at the same thing again, but with the other panel, and I'll just show you a different method. One of the most valuable things that we can have as metal shapers is old cold chisels. Now, a great source is second-hand shops from deceased estates and things like that, and what we do with them is we grind them into unique shapes that we can do things with. The humble gasket scraper can be ground into shapes that we can use for shaping metal. So here's a few that I've just done over the years. Where's your camera? And this one here we're going to use today, where it's got a straight edge on the back, a sharp corner there, and then it's radiused in every direction there. I use this one a lot, which is just a blunt chisel with a rounded edge on it. And here's another one that was ground for a particular job to get a particular shape. So we've now got our piece of metal with no crown built into it already, so it is just perfectly flat in this area here, and we do have a tiny little bit of depression in the corner there from the way it was folded in the vise, so that's a normal thing to expect. So what we'll do is start bending it along the areas we know need to be curved, but this time I'm going to use this special chisel with the curve in it and the flat edge on it, and we're going to push from the bottom side. Now this is just a different technique. There's no reason why we couldn't have done this with the other one. I just wanted to demonstrate that we could bend it over the spread jaws of the vise. And this will give us exactly the same result as the other one. The only thing is we'll wind up with some little tool marks along the edge here. They can be brought out simply again with the plenishing hammer, working those spots like that. They're no big deal. The thickness of this material at 1mm, you could grind that and it would be smooth again. So this is just another way of working it, and you'll get the same sort of result from that. Now I will point out this is 1mm thick cold rolled sheet. I have painted it with an etch primer so it doesn't go rusty. I live in a coastal area. It comes with no finish on it whatsoever. You could use a little piece of zinc annealed material. It has got a little bit more tensile strength than what this has. It's a little bit harder to work, but for this amount of shaping you could use that. So we'll use the same method across here. Now you will develop favourite techniques, and it's just a matter of looking at what's out there. Do I know every technique available? No, I don't. There's other people will have different techniques to what I use, and that will work for them. And if I was shown those, I might think they were easier than what I'm already doing as well. So every metal shaper has developed their own little bag of tricks. These are just some of the ones that I use. Now already we're getting a bit of curve in it. It wants a bit more in here, but we've got a good curve this way. So from here we can simply start working it with our fingers, because that's just how malleable the metal is. because what we've done is by adding the curves to the edge, we've built tension into the sheet. By pushing it in the centre on a specific spot, we are releasing that tension and moving it into that spot there. So we're getting close to having crown in here simply by curving the two edges. So that's a handy trick to know. Now I've just quickly folded a piece here that I can put on the bottom, and I've put a little bit of shape into it, and we want to go a little bit further. Now the strength of this material, if you have a piece that is this long, you can bend a 10mm fold by hand. So if you wanted to go to a sheet metal worker and say, cut me some strips of metal that are however wide we want them this way by 10mm, and fold them for you in pieces if you've got a few sections to make, we can do it that way, and we can simply curve those by hand. I'll just tidy this corner up a little bit. And what have we got? It's all a patience game. If you want to put a little bit of time and effort into them, you can get very good results and very satisfying repair sections. So what we'll do is quickly weld this together, and we will have that just about sorted for you. Alright, we're just going to weld this on now. I'm not aiming for a super fantastic job, we just want something that's going to do it and demonstrate it, but that's all we need to do now is we can weld that across that centre, get it nice and flat, give it a grind, and we're ready to start fitting it to the car. Once we've got a tack in, we can feel across the join. And so I've got this spot here where it feels quite nice, it's nice and flush, so I can put another spot in there. And what we need to do when we're welding two sections together to make a curve is get it tacked all the way across, because that actually locks it in the shape then, it can't move. Because if we have any shrinkage on our weld, and on a piece like this, the shrinkage will be so minimal that it's not even worth worrying about, because what actually happens is this side here wants to shrink, this side here wants to shrink, and the stress in the metal actually stretches the weld out and it keeps it stable. So the big trick is to get a series of tacks all the way across, and then that will lock our curve in. If we started welding here and working our way across with the weld, there's a good chance that we would change the shape of this and we won't have the curve to match our car anymore. So we'll throw another spot in there, and I'll get another one down the end, and then we'll just weld them together. Now it's natural, as soon as we put a hot piece in the metal there, this end here is going to want to open out, but you just wait a second or two, and which it's done now, it'll close back up. Righto, and one on the end. And I'm welding about 20mm, 3/4 of an inch at a time, and I'm ending my weld on top of one of my existing tacks, mainly because as we get this far, the heat in the metal increases, the heat in the weld increases, and when we land it on a tack, we prevent the issue of it wanting to melt through on the last little piece of our weld. But also, because the tack is just a spot by itself, you quite often do not get the same penetration on the tack you do with the rest of it. So by ending your weld on top of it, you've got this nice hot pool of metal that's going to want to melt in there. Now, general rule of thumb, pointed this out before, if you can comfortably hold your hand on the metal, it is cool enough that you can weld some more. So it's very hot at the moment because I've got two welds quite close together, so we'll leave that sit for a minute and we'll get another pass in there. So what we'll do is we'll probably weld this one in here next and this one in here. We'll let it cool down again and then we'll come back and we'll weld half of the middle, I'd say. We might get all of it. That's probably up around 22, 23 millimeters there. It's not quite an inch, so 7/8 of an inch or something like that. So probably to the extent of what you'd get away with on something like this. So we might even hit it all the way through and just see what happens. Just got this little spot here where I'm just a whisker high on this edge here. So I need to just get in there and support the back of it with the corner of my dolly, actually. Support the corner of it with my chisel. And I can just tap this front edge down a little bit. And all we want is for that to line up exactly. And we've got that, so we'll run a bit more weld on it. Ready? Incline your welder in the direction that you're welding. The electrical arc will just eat a little trench out ahead of the weld for the weld to sit in, and that'll help with the penetration as well. I'll only ever push a MIG welder uphill because what tends to happen is the weld sits there in a ball and sits on the outside of your metal. So when you're going uphill, you get the best penetration of ever because gravity is actually holding that ball against that piece of metal as you're going up, and it will melt into it. Where we're doing stuff on the flat like this, always just incline it a little bit in the direction of travel and you'll get a much better result. Just put a bit on this other end here, finish that off. I tend to weld across any tacks that are in the way, so I had a spot in here where I had started a little bit out from the first tack and we had a little bit on the end. So I started my weld and I ran all the way across, and now I've only got this last little piece, but we're back to cooling down again because we've got so much heat built up into it now that we will run the risk of pulling some of our crown out on the top edge if we do that last little piece now. So we'll give that a minute or three and then we'll be right to go. So there you have it, Mark. We have made a panel with curve in it this way. We've got a bit of fullness on the top and we've got curve down the other side as well. And it's all been done with simple hand tools. So you should be able to recreate something very similar to this at home, and I hope it's been helpful for you. But we will now move on to another query. So we'll just go back to the computer and we'll pull up another email and we'll have a look at the problem that Shay's having. I'll just read out Shay's message to me on Facebook, and this one is, "Hi Rob, after some advice, or point me to one of your videos that covers this please. Finding sometimes when I weld car panels, I end up grinding the weld too much and thinning the metal or cracking the weld. Normally I just use a grinder to take off the MIG weld top, and then I go to a small sanding belt. Any help would be appreciated to get a nice flat weld, thank you." Okay Shay, we'll have a look at that now. I used to do a lot of grinding with the grinder and take most of the MIG weld head off it, for want of a better word, and I would finish up with various disc grinders and things like that. Since Cubitron 3M discs have come on the market, it's sort of obsoleted the grinder, and they do make an adapter to put their discs onto a grinder. We've got a 60 grit disc here, and this is my favourite. This one seems to be the best grit. It'll bring it back to a nice smooth finish, and it will rip down a MIG weld on sheet metal in no time at all. Now they make an adapter to put this onto a 5-inch 125mm angle grinder, but I find that on an electric grinder, like mains powered one, they just run too fast for what we want to do. Now I haven't tried this, but I suspect that if we got hold of a battery powered angle grinder with one of these discs, you would have a better thing than what you're using at the moment. The trouble you get with the belt sanders is because of the little radius on the end of it, it wants to V into the weld. The other thing that we've always got to be conscious of is the amount of weld penetration we have. So if you find that you have welded a section and you have got a crack running across it in line with where your two pieces of metal butted together, you probably don't have enough penetration on the weld. So a suggestion would be to try and increase the current that you're applying your weld to. But what we'll do is we'll throw this disc on the grinder and we'll just tackle the piece that we made for Mark, and we'll see how it comes up just grinding it with this. Before we get going, a lot of people ask me about flat discs, and I'm not a big fan for sheet metal. What tends to happen is, because the way they're made with all the little pieces of emery in there that overlap each other, so they tend to walk and they'll ride over the piece you're trying to grind, and they'll eat the metal out either side of it. And I have seen so many times, professionals included in this, where they will get the weld almost back to where they want it, but they've created a trench either side, and it's because of just the nature of the flat disc, how it will ride up and ride down and follow contours to a degree. So if you've got a rigid disc or a grinding wheel, we can actually just work along the weld and attack the weld, and then if we're watching what we're doing, we can actually bring it down and just blend it to the metal underneath there. So we'll do that with this one, but I'll stop several times through it and we'll talk about what we're looking at and what's happening. Now, like everything, we've got to pick on the high points first, so we'll do that, but I like to sort of run along the weld with the grinder, so that I've actually got the wheel turning like this and we're actually running along the grind rather than across it. So we've probably got about half of the material off now. So I've got that. I haven't touched any of the parent material either side of the weld. We've just been working on the weld and it's coming down nice and flat. So I'll take it down a little bit further and we'll just get to the point where we start touching some of this stuff around it, and then we'll look at what we can do and how we can go with the grinder to get that the best we can. Now I've got the bulk of the material away. We're starting to touch around there. Now this was a panel that we just quickly made a little while ago. It was just formed with the hammer, so there's going to be some little ups and downs, and it's a good way to demonstrate what we're talking about with the grinder and the taking material away from the parent. So we're touching on this side of the weld here. Can we close up it now? So we're starting to grind this side of the weld here, so we've got to look at, when we come back to this patch, angling the grinder in to get this to follow there. And it doesn't matter if we have a little depression, because we're going to have to put a little bit of filler in here anyway. This one here is almost perfect. We're just getting just a touch on here, and we've still got a little shadow of weld, and on this side we've just got enough for my finger to catch on, so we can work this edge of it rather than that edge and get it down smooth. This stretch in the middle here, we're still high there. We've just got to grind the piece of weld, in there. And this patch here, we've actually got a perfect finish all the way across. We've got rid of the weld and we've just touched either side of it. So we'll come back, I'll finish this now. And naturally, because we just hammer form these edges, we're going to have these little ripples in here. So we could wind up with a few little spots, but they're insignificant. They don't really matter. So we'll knock that off, and then we'll have a look at it from the back, and we'll have a close-up of our weld. For this little job today, this is as good as this one's going to come up because of the nature of how we built it and the speed that we did it in. We've got a little low spot in the metal, which is outside from the weld there. And this area here where I've ground hasn't actually eaten in there, it's more or less just taken the paint off. We've got a nice smooth area in here. There's still a little tiny lump of weld in there, which we could come back and get rid of completely. This here, we've got a little bit of a mismatch in the sheet, so we've got a little shadow there, but this is all pretty good. So if we're getting a finish like that, we have to be happy with that. But what we'll do, stay there, we'll turn it around. We're looking at the back of our weld in here, and we've got a nice spot. We've got a bead down there. We just want a little pointy to get in there. We've got a full penetration spot here. We've got a little spot in there where there's a little bit of a crevice there. So if we ground that really hard on the other side and hopped into our metal, we could wind up with a crack coming through from that not being welded all the way through. We've got another little spot there, and then we've got a full penetration here, and we've got another little spot there and a little bit in there. But this is a good weld. A weld finished to this point I would be happy with in any one of my restorations. So this is what we're looking for. If you're grinding your repairs and you're finding that you're getting a crack that might be, well, 2 centimetres long, 20 millimetres, an inch, something like that, you've got to look at what you're putting in there underneath your welding. You've also got to look at how much material you're actually taking away either side of your weld when you're grinding. And I think, for my money, these Cubitron discs are the best thing. Like, this is not an advert for 3M. I've used a lot of discs in my time, and these things just crush everything else out there on the market. They cost a bit more, but they do a lot more work, so you get the value back in it in that way. And I really think for a home workshop, if you team that with a battery grinder, you're going to have a system that's almost unbeatable. And I'm even thinking myself that the cost of running compressed air these days, like my biggest input expense into this workshop is electricity, and I've got electric compressors. And so a battery drill, you throw it in a recharger and it's half an hour, it's charged up again. It's got to be a saving that way as well. So we'll probably even look at that ourselves. So hopefully, Shay, that's helped you, and then we'll move on and we'll look at some other problems. Just recently got this message through Facebook from Otto, and he's recently picked up a HT ute and wants some advice about removing quarter panels. So I'll just read what he says. Recently picked this up as a project, has bulk rust, and as a challenge, it's right up there. Going to have to remove both rear quarters and refabricate most of the supporting pieces and the rear floor. So he's asking basically, how can I get the quarters off? Well, it's relatively straightforward. We can just start by drilling spot welds everywhere we can find them and working our way around them. But given that it's a HT ute and we've got our HGs here, they're the same car, so we'll have a quick look at them and just walk around where all the seams are. Normally there's going to be rust down the bottom here, so anywhere that's rusted out, before you start removing your panel, get measurements to just how far down these pieces are. If you can scribe some reference lines in and get some photographs on your phone or just even a notebook somewhere and just measure, say that this is, for example, 150 millimetres or 200 millimetres, and you've scribed a line across there down to that area before you start, and the same anywhere else where you want to cut it other than where the factory joined it. Get some measurements before you start going. Now, quarters off cars, I like the car supported, and support the car as much as you can. If it's going to be a quick thing where it's going to be in and out of the workshop in a matter of a few weeks, I would just be using axle stands placed at strategic points underneath the car to make sure that none of the car moves while you've got the quarters off it. If it's going to be any length of time and you want to be moving the car, say to take it to a sandblaster and bring it back, I would be supporting it on rails and welding the body to that. But set your rails in such a way that you can access all of the rusty areas. So we've got spot welds all the way up here. We can feel and find the depressions. I like an 8mm 5/16 drill bit to drill those out, and often you're going to find that the panel will wrap around the corner like this one does, but you won't have to worry too much about it. You can cut them through on a corner on an angle and come back and just weld that with the MIG afterwards. You'll have to melt the lead out. If you look at our videos where we removed the roof from this car, we've got a series of spot welds in here underneath the lead, and you just need some sort of a heating method to get it out, and a propane or an LPG torch is enough to melt the lead and let it flow out the way. I prefer not to grind the lead because you can inhale it, you can have health issues from that. So this is part of the quarter, all the way around the corner. We've got a lead seam through here with a weld through the corner, and we've got a weld through into here. We've got spot welds up the inside of here. And once again, usually cars like this are rusty in this area anyway, so if you've got to do a rust repair in there, you might find that it's easier to cut just in from the corner and make a new section to go in there. But my advice here is, if you're going to replace this section, make this section first before you cut the quarter off the car. The other thing is, the top edge here rolls over. So this laps over here and it's spot welded along this edge in here. But this is also a common rust area. So you might find that you're going to make a replacement piece on here, and that's exactly the same way we did Mark's headlight pieces. We can actually get a piece folded by a sheet metal worker, and we can form it by hand to get this curve in here, and we can put a butt weld all the way along the top here if we're going to do a rust repair in there. If that is the case, you can simply cut this along here and take the panel off, leave this piece behind, trim your waste off later, and providing we've got a measurement from the outside to the inside edge here, we can repair this later and put it back together as an afterthought. We have a leaded seam in the corner, and it's only a matter of melting that out, and this one in here will be a butt weld, so it's just a matter of cutting that straight through with the grinder and into your taillight area. We've got spot welds down here, a weld along here, cut through that, spot welds along the bottom, but you're going to have to repair this through here. So once again, before you remove your quarter, get your repair section sorted. Either you're going to make one yourself or you're going to buy one off the shelf, but the best advice I can give you is get your rust repair section and get a scribe line on your panel before you remove it, so you know where your waste is going to be, you know where you're going to cut it, and then you can cut this area through where it's rusted anywhere you like, and it comes off. When it comes to going back together, you've got your scribe line there ready to work to. We've got just a straight lip on the wheel arch with spot welds through it, and once again, if it's rusty in there and you're going to be replacing the inner piece in there, you've got the choice of cutting this off if you've got to do a repair on the wheel arch. But if you've got good salvageable metal, you can just drill these spot welds, the wheel arch will come apart, and every one of these utes I've seen that has been lived a life as a ute will be rusty through this section through here. So once again, get your repair section, mark it on your quarter panel before you remove your quarter panel. You will save yourself a lot of effort. Anywhere where you want to remove an existing panel from a car and refit it to the same car, the best advice I can give you is along your spot welded seams is to put the occasional tech screw in it and remove it prior to drilling your spot welds, or just drill a small hole that you can use as a guide for a tech screw, because when it comes time to putting it back together, it is only a matter of aligning those holes. The panel will automatically be back where the factory had it. You can tech screw the entire panel to the car, and then you start welding from that. It just makes it so much easier, so much quicker. The fitting of your replacement panels to it, even if the car's in bad shape, it saves so much time. So hopefully that's helped you, Otto, and we'll look forward to hearing more from you as your project progresses. That's our pilot episode of Road to Restoration, and this channel is dedicated entirely to you guys at home and facing the problems that you have with your projects, and we are trying to help in whatever way we can to make your journey a bit easier. We call it Road to Restoration because every restoration is a journey. Now, I have approached many reality TV show companies over this idea over the last 10 years in the hopes that they would pick it up. I could see myself doing this as a job. I would dearly love to come to your shed, work with you on your project for a few hours or a day or so to help you through some of these hurdles. At this stage, we can't afford to do that. COVID has put the brakes on it a fair bit, but we're hoping to grow this channel that when the world opens up again after this COVID pandemic, we are ready to leap and we're ready to actually do something with this. We will continue to build the Rob Shed channel, and we will keep bringing you the projects that I'm working on in my shed. If you would like to be involved in this program and you would like me to actually look at some of your problems, you can contact me via rob@roadtorestoration.net, and we'll run a little thing across the bottom of the screen for you so you don't have to remember that straight off, and it'll also be in the credits. Now, if you send me photos of your build and a little outline of where your problems are, we can address that in future videos. So up to this stage, Deb and I have funded these videos ourselves. If you want to help with the channel and want to make a financial contribution, there is no obligation to do so, but we will include our PayPal details, and any donations would be gratefully received. So I'm looking forward to seeing you guys further down the road. That's the road to restoration. See you next time.